Female police officer beats a black woman outside court not knowing she was a judge. You made the biggest mistake of your career, Officer Grant, but justice has a way of finding those who abuse their power. What could make a seasoned police captain's face drain of all color? A female officer brutally assaults a woman on the courthouse steps, her authority wielded like a weapon, until the victim reveals an identity that shatters everything. Who is this woman, and why does her revelation send shockwaves through the entire justice system? This is the story of how one act of violence exposed a web of corruption, and how dignity triumphed over brutality. Let's dive into it. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete steps of the Davidson County Courthouse, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness about to unfold. The building stood as a monument to justice, its tall columns and imposing architecture, designed to inspire respect and reverence for the law. People moved in and out of the heavy oak doors, lawyers in crisp suits clutching briefcases, witnesses nervously checking their phones, court staff hurrying between buildings with stacks of files. It was a typical Thursday afternoon in the legal district where justice was supposed to be blind and fair. Nicole Harper stood near the bottom of the courthouse steps, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in low, measured tones. She was a striking woman in her early 40s with rich, dark brown skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Her hair was styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders, professionally maintained and pulled back from her face. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that spoke of success and authority. Though today she had dressed down deliberately, choosing not to wear her judicial robes outside the courtroom. A simple white blouse beneath her jacket and low heels completed her ensemble. She carried a leather messenger bag over one shoulder, filled with case files and legal documents she had been reviewing during a brief recess. Her conversation was important, a discussion with a colleague about an upcoming case that required careful consideration. She had stepped outside for privacy, away from the crowded hallways and the constant buzz of the courthouse interior. The steps were relatively empty at this hour, most people either inside for afternoon sessions or having left for late lunch. Nicole appreciated these quiet moments. They gave her time to think, to strategize, to remember why she had fought so hard to reach the position she now held. She didn't notice Officer Latoya Grant approaching at first. Grant was a 32-year-old patrol officer assigned to courthouse security, a position she had held for the past 3 years. She was a tall woman, standing nearly 6 feet, with a muscular build that came from hours in the gym and a chip on her shoulder that came from years of feeling overlooked and underappreciated. Her dark uniform was crisp and perfectly pressed, her badge gleaming in the sunlight. Her utility belt held all the tools of her trade: handcuffs, pepper spray, radio, and most importantly, her service weapon. She wore her hair in a tight bun pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of disapproval. Grant had been having a terrible day. An argument with her supervisor that morning had left her fuming, a written warning about her increasingly aggressive behavior toward civilians. She had been told to take a break to cool down, but instead she had been stewing in her anger, looking for an outlet. When she saw Nicole standing on the steps talking on her phone, something inside her snapped. Here was someone who didn't belong, someone who looked out of place, someone she could control. Officer Grant's boots clicked against the stone steps as she approached, her hand already moving to her belt. She had decided without any real justification that Nicole was loitering, that she was somehow a threat or a disturbance to the courthouse operations. In reality, Grant saw a black woman who didn't immediately project deference, who stood with confidence, who dared to occupy space on the steps of justice as if she had every right to be there. "Excuse me." Grant's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Nicole held up one finger, a universal gesture, asking for just a moment to finish her conversation. She turned slightly away, not dismissive, but simply needing 30 more seconds to conclude her important call. That gesture, that simple moment of not immediately complying, would prove to be the spark that ignited everything. "I said excuse me," Grant repeated, her voice rising several octaves. She was now standing directly behind Nicole, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. "Did you hear me? You need to move along. You can't be loitering on the courthouse steps." Nicole held up her finger again, still focused on her conversation. "Just one moment," she said quietly into the phone, her tone patient. "Let me call you back. Something has come up." She ended the call and turned to face the officer, her expression calm but questioning. Sorry, officer, is there a problem? Grant's eyes narrowed. Yeah, there's a problem. You're loitering. You need to move along right now. This isn't a place for people to just stand around making phone calls. Nicole's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. She glanced around the steps, noting several other people standing nearby having conversations, checking phones, waiting for companions. Nobody else was being asked to move. She took a slow breath, centering herself, drawing on years of experience dealing with difficult situations. I wasn't aware that making a phone call on a public courthouse steps constituted loitering, Nicole replied, her voice even and professional. I'm here on official business, and I'm simply taking a brief moment to complete a call. Is there a specific ordinance I'm violating? The question was reasonable, logical, and delivered without hostility. But to Officer Grant, it represented defiance. It represented someone questioning her authority, and that was something she would not tolerate, especially not from someone who looked like Nicole. Don't get smart with me, Grant snapped, taking another step closer. I don't need you questioning me. When I tell you to move, you move. Do you understand? Nicole remained calm, though. Inside, she felt the familiar flutter of unease that came from recognizing a situation escalating unnecessarily. She had been here before, not in this exact scenario, but in countless moments throughout her life where authority had been wielded like a weapon against her simply because of the color of her skin. Officer, I'm not being smart, Nicole said, maintaining her composure. I'm simply trying to understand what I've done wrong. I have every right to be here, and I'm happy to show you my identification, if that would help resolve this situation. Grant's hand moved to her pepper spray. Show me ID? You think showing me ID is going to make this better? You should have moved when I first told you to. Now you're being uncooperative, and I'm going to have to remove you from the premises. Remove me? Nicole's voice carried a note of disbelief now. Officer, I really think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not causing any disturbance. I'm not blocking access to the building. I'm simply standing here. A small crowd had begun to gather now, people pausing on their way in and out of the courthouse, sensing that something was wrong. A young woman with her phone out had started recording the scene, capturing every word, every gesture. An older man in a suit watched with concern, his hand hovering near his own phone, ready to call for help if needed. Grant noticed the gathering crowd, and it only fueled her anger. She was being watched, being questioned, and she would not back down. You're resisting, she declared loudly, her voice carrying across the steps. You're being uncooperative and refusing to follow lawful orders. I'm not resisting anything, Nicole protested, her calm beginning to fracture around the edges. I'm asking you to explain what I've done wrong. That's my right as a citizen. What happened next occurred so quickly that many witnesses would later struggle to recount the exact sequence of events. Officer Grant lunged forward, grabbing Nicole's arm with brutal force. Before Nicole could even react, Grant had spun her around, twisting her arm behind her back in a painful hold that made Nicole cry out. Let go of me, Nicole demanded, her voice rising. You have no right to put your hands on me. Grant didn't respond. With words instead, she shoved Nicole forward, slamming her against the stone railing that bordered the courthouse steps. The impact knocked the breath from Nicole's lungs, her messenger bag falling from her shoulder and spilling its contents across the steps. Legal documents fluttered in the breeze, case files, scattered manila folders burst open, revealing sensitive court information. Stop resisting, Grant shouted, though Nicole was barely moving, merely trying to protect herself from the assault. The officer's training had taught her how to restrain someone, but her anger had transformed proper technique into brutal violence. She pressed Nicole harder against the railing, her forearm across Nicole's back, pinning her down. Nicole's face scraped against the rough stone, and she tasted blood in her mouth. Pain radiated through her body from multiple points of impact, her shoulder, her ribs, her cheek. She wanted to fight back. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, but years of training, both legal and personal, kept her hands visible, kept her from giving Grant any excuse to escalate further. I'm not resisting, Nicole managed to gasp out, her voice strained. You're hurting me. Please stop. The crowd had grown larger now, at least a dozen people watching in horror. Several had their phones out, recording the scene, capturing every brutal moment. Someone was shouting for another officer to intervene, calling for anyone to stop this madness. Officer Kevin Morrison appeared at the top of the courthouse steps. He was a veteran officer in his 50s who had worked courthouse security for over a decade. He knew Grant had been struggling lately, knew she had been written up for aggressive behavior, but he had never imagined she would go this far. His face went pale as he took in the scene his colleague assaulting a well-dressed woman for no apparent reason, while a crowd of witnesses documented everything. "Grant!" Morrison shouted, rushing down the steps. "What are you doing? Let her go!" But Grant was too far gone, too consumed by her rage and her need to dominate. She yanked Nicole away from the railing, spinning her around roughly. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Grant saw something in Nicole's gaze that should have given her pause. Not fear exactly, but a deep knowing, a recognition of exactly what was happening and why. It was the look of someone who had faced injustice before and survived. It was the look of someone who knew she would survive this too. Grant's fist came up fast, catching Nicole across the jaw. The blow snapped Nicole's head to the side and she stumbled, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. The crowd gasped, several people crying out in shock and outrage. Morrison was running now, but he seemed to move in slow motion, unable to reach them fast enough to prevent what came next. Grant struck again, this time hitting Nicole in the ribs, a vicious blow that doubled her over. As Nicole bent forward, trying to protect herself, trying to breathe through the pain, Grant brought her knee up, connecting with Nicole's face. Blood sprayed from Nicole's nose, and she collapsed to her knees on the stone steps, her hands instinctively coming up to protect her head. The crowd was screaming now. Morrison had finally reached them, and he physically grabbed Grant, pulling her away from Nicole. "Grant, what the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, his voice filled with horror and disbelief. "Look what you've done." Grant stood there, breathing hard, her uniform disheveled, her knuckles bleeding from where they had connected with Nicole's face and body. She looked down at Nicole, crumpled on the steps, blood dripping onto the gray stone. And for just a moment, reality began to penetrate her rage. But instead of remorse, what flooded through her was defensive justification. She was resisting. Grant panted, trying to catch her breath. "She refused to comply with my orders. She was aggressive." Morrison stared at her, incredulous. "Resisting?" "Grant, she was standing there talking on her phone. There are dozens of witnesses who saw the whole thing. You just assaulted someone in front of the entire courthouse." Other officers had arrived now, including Captain Robert Mason, the supervisor, who had written Grant up that very morning. Mason was an imposing man in his late 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen too much in his 30 years on the force. He took one look at the scene and his face hardened into an expression of grim determination. "Someone call an ambulance," Mason ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. He knelt beside Nicole, who was trying to sit up, blood still flowing from her nose, staining her white blouse. "Ma'am, can you hear me? We're getting you medical attention. Just try to stay still." Nicole's eyes focused on him, her gaze clear despite the obvious pain she was in. "I hear you," she managed to say, her voice thick with blood and pain. Captain Mason's trained eye took in her injuries. The split lip, the rapidly swelling jaw, the blood streaming from her nose, the way she held her ribs suggesting possible fractures. This wasn't just an arrest gone wrong. This was a brutal assault, and he knew it. He turned to Grant, his eyes blazing with barely controlled fury. "Officer Grant, you're suspended effective immediately. Hand over your badge and weapon right now." Grant's eyes widened in shock. "What? Captain," she was resisting. "I had to save it," Mason cut her off. "I don't want to hear another word from you. Badge and weapon now, or I'll have you arrested right here on these steps." Grant fumbled with her badge, her hand shaking as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She unclipped her service weapon and handed both items to Morrison, who took them with a look of disgust. The crowd watched in silence, now the only sound Nicole's labored breathing and the distant wail of an approaching ambulance. Mason turned back to Nicole, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry for what just happened. This is not how we operate. This is not acceptable, and I promise you there will be consequences. Can you tell me your name?" Nicole looked up at him through eyes that were already beginning to swell. Her split lip curved into the smallest of pained smiles. "My name," she said slowly, each word clearly costing her, "is Judge Nicole Harper." I serve in Division 4. I believe we've met at several official functions, Captain Mason. The color drained from Mason's face so rapidly he looked as though he might faint. Around them, the murmurs of the crowd rose to a fever pitch as people began to realize what had just been revealed. Morrison's jaw dropped open, his eyes wide with horror. Even Grant, who had been standing there defiant and defensive, seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what she had done. Judge Harper. Mason whispered, his voice barely audible. Oh my God. Judge Harper. I didn't recognize you without your robes. Nicole nodded slightly, her expression remaining calm despite everything. Most people don't, she said quietly. That's part of the problem, isn't it, Captain? When I'm wearing my robes, everyone sees the position, the authority, the power. But when I'm standing on these steps in a regular suit, apparently I'm just another black woman who can be brutalized without consequence. The words hung in the air, a damning indictment that no one could refute. The ambulance arrived moments later, and paramedics rushed to Nicole's side, beginning their assessment of her injuries. As they worked, Captain Mason stood frozen, watching them prepare to transport her to the hospital. Officer Grant stood nearby now in handcuffs, placed there by Morrison, who couldn't even look at his colleague. The crowd had grown to over 50 people now, with more streaming out of the courthouse drawn by the commotion. Among them were lawyers, judges, court staff, and civilians, all of whom would become witnesses to what would be one of the most significant incidents in the county's legal history. Phones continued to record, capturing every moment from Nicole being carefully placed on a stretcher, to Officer Grant being led away in handcuffs, her head down, her career in ruins. As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens cutting through the afternoon, Air Captain Mason stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the scattered contents of Judge Harper's messenger bag. He knelt down carefully, gathering the legal documents and case files, his hands trembling slightly. Among the papers, he found her judicial identification badge, her name and title, clearly printed beneath her official photograph. Judge Nicole Harper, Division 4, Criminal Court. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that what had happened here today would have repercussions far beyond one officer's misconduct. This was going to expose everything, the biases, the blind spots, the failures of a system that was supposed to protect everyone equally. And as he stood there holding the evidence of a judge's identity in his hands, Captain Robert Mason understood that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The courthouse steps where justice was supposed to begin had instead become the site of its greatest betrayal. But what no one knew yet was that this was only the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of the entire legal system and force everyone to confront the uncomfortable truths they had been avoiding for far too long. The emergency room at Davidson County Medical Center buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, doctors moving between curtained bays, nurses checking monitors, the steady beep of medical equipment creating a rhythm of urgency. In Bay 7, behind a curtain that provided minimal privacy, Judge Nicole Harper sat on an examination table while Dr. Nathan Pierce carefully documented her injuries. The doctor was a man in his mid-40s with kind brown eyes and gentle hands that had treated countless victims of violence over his career, but something about this case had shaken him more than most. Judge Harper, I need you to hold still for just a moment longer, Dr. Pierce said softly, as he examined her jaw with careful fingers. I'm checking for fractures. This is going to be tender. Nicole winced but remained motionless, her hands gripping the edge of the examination table. Her face had swollen significantly in the hour since the assault. Her left eye nearly closed her jaw, painted in shades of purple and black. Her split lip had been cleaned but still oozed slightly, and dried blood crusted around her nostrils. She had refused pain medication until all the examinations were complete, wanting to remain clear-headed for what she knew was coming. How bad is it? She asked, her voice slightly muffled by the swelling. Dr. Pierce stepped back, removing his gloves and making notes on his tablet. You have a fractured cheekbone, a severely sprained jaw, soft tissue damage throughout your face, and significant bruising to your ribs. I don't believe the ribs are fractured, but we'll need x-rays to confirm. You're going to be in considerable pain for the next several weeks. He paused, looking at her with an expression that mixed professional concern with personal anger. Judge Harper, in my professional opinion, these injuries are consistent with being struck multiple times with significant force. This wasn't an accident, or even an overly aggressive arrest. This was a beating. Nicole nodded slowly, the motion making her head throb. I know, Doctor. I was there. Before Dr. Pierce could respond, the curtain pulled back and Captain Robert Mason entered, followed by another man Nicole didn't immediately recognize. Mason looked haggard, his usually crisp uniform rumpled, his face drawn with stress and worry. The man with him was younger, perhaps 40, with sharp features and calculating eyes that took in everything at once. Judge Harper, Mason began, his voice heavy with remorse. I wanted to come by personally to check on you and to apologize again for what happened. This is Internal Affairs Investigator Detective Raymond Foster. He needs to get your statement if you're up to it. Nicole studied the detective for a moment, reading the skepticism in his posture, the way he held his notepad as if it were a weapon. She had seen hundreds of law enforcement officers in her courtroom over the years, and she knew how to read them. Foster was going to be a problem. Detective Foster, she acknowledged, her voice steady despite her injuries. I'm willing to give my statement, though I would prefer my attorney be present. Foster's eyebrow raised slightly. That's certainly your right, Judge Harper, but I have to say it's an unusual request for a victim statement. Makes me wonder if there's more to this story than we're being told. The implication was clear and insulting. Captain Mason's face darkened with anger, but before he could speak, Nicole held up her hand, stopping him. She fixed Foster with a look that, despite her battered face, carried all the authority of her position. Detective Foster, let me be very clear, she said, each word precisely chosen. I am requesting my attorney not because I have anything to hide, but because I know how investigations like this work. I know how narratives get twisted, how victim statements get reinterpreted, how officers close ranks to protect their own. I spent 15 years as a prosecutor before becoming a judge. I know every trick in the book because I used to use them myself. Foster's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. Fair enough, Judge. When can we schedule a formal interview? Tomorrow morning, Nicole replied. 9 o'clock at my chambers. My attorney will be present, and I want every word recorded and transcribed. After they left, Dr. Pierce returned with a prescription pad and a serious expression. I'm giving you pain medication and anti-inflammatories, he said. I'm also recommending you take at least a week off work. Your body needs time to heal. Nicole shook her head immediately despite the pain it caused. No. I'll take tomorrow off for the investigation, but I'm back in court the day after. I have cases that can't wait, and I won't give anyone the satisfaction of thinking they can intimidate me into hiding. The doctor sighed, clearly wanting to argue, but recognizing the determination in her eyes. At least promise me you'll rest when you can, and if the pain becomes unbearable, or if you experience any dizziness or confusion, you come back immediately. I promise, Nicole agreed, though they both knew she was unlikely to follow that advice unless absolutely necessary. She was released 2 hours later, stepping out of the hospital into the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost mocking in their beauty. A black sedan waited at the curb, and as Nicole approached, the back door opened, revealing Tyrone Mitchell, her closest friend and colleague. Tyrone was a fellow judge, tall and distinguished, with close-cropped graying hair and warm brown eyes that currently blazed with barely suppressed fury. Nicole, he breathed as she slid into the car beside him. Oh my God, they said it was bad, but seeing you... His voice broke slightly and he looked away, composing himself. I'm okay, Nicole assured him, though her reflection in the car window told a different story. It looks worse than it is. Tyrone turned back to her, his expression fierce. Don't minimize this. A police officer beat you on the courthouse steps. She beat a sitting judge. Do you understand what this means? I understand exactly what it means, Nicole replied quietly as the driver pulled away from the hospital. It means what I've always known. That my position, my title, my accomplishments, none of it matters when all someone sees is my skin color. To that officer, I wasn't Judge Harper. I was just another black woman who didn't show proper deference. Tyrone was silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and determined. This can't stand, Nicole. We need to make sure Grant is prosecuted to the fullest extent. We need to make sure this becomes a catalyst for real change. I know, Nicole agreed, and we will. But first I need to survive the investigation. You know as well as I do that they're going to try to find some way to justify what she did. They're going to look for any excuse, any precedent, any reason to claim she was just doing her job. Not with the footage, they're not, Tyrone countered. There were at least a dozen people recording. It's all over social media already. The whole world saw what happened. Social media doesn't determine guilt or innocence, Nicole reminded him. A jury does, or in this case probably a judge. And we both know how easily public opinion can be manipulated. We need to be strategic, careful. The car pulled up outside Nicole's home, a modest two-story house in a quiet neighborhood. Security lights illuminated the front walkway, and through the windows Nicole could see movement inside. Her sister Nicole must have already arrived. Tyrone helped her out of the car, his hand gentle under her elbow as they walked to the front. Door inside, Nicole Harper Stevens rushed forward, her face a mask of worry and rage. Nicole's younger sister was a fierce woman, an attorney specializing in civil rights law, who had dedicated her career to fighting the kind of injustice her sister had just experienced. When she saw Nicole's battered face, tears sprang to her eyes. Those bastards, Nicole whispered, pulling Nicole into a careful hug. I swear to God I'm going to make them pay for this. Not now, Nick, Nicole said, gently pulling back. Right now, I just need to sit down and figure out our strategy. They moved to the living room where Nicole's attorney Bernard Hughes was already waiting. Hughes was a legend in legal circles, a 70-year-old black man who had been fighting civil rights battles since the 1960s. His white hair and lined face spoke of decades of struggle, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. He rose as Nicole entered, his expression carefully controlled, though she could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Nicole, he said simply, embracing her gently. We're going to handle this, all of it. They spent the next 3 hours going over every detail of the incident. Nicole recounted the events with the precision of a trained legal mind, remembering every word, every gesture, every moment from the initial approach to the final blow. Hughes recorded everything, taking detailed notes while Nicole pulled up the various videos that had been posted online. The footage was damning, showing clearly that Nicole had done nothing to provoke the attack. The videos captured her calm responses, Officer Grant's escalating aggression, the moment of first contact, and every brutal blow that followed. Comments on the videos ranged from outrage to skeptical, some people refusing to believe that a police officer would assault someone so viciously without cause. People don't want to believe it's real, Nicole said bitterly, scrolling through the comments. They're looking for any reason to blame you. What were you wearing? Why didn't you just comply? Maybe you said something off camera that provoked her. It's disgusting. It's predictable, Nicole corrected, though her voice was tired. People need to believe the system works. They need to believe that if you follow the rules, you'll be protected. Accepting that a police officer can brutalize someone for no reason means accepting that none of us are safe. Hughes looked up from his notes, his expression thoughtful. The investigation by Internal Affairs is going to be crucial. Detective Foster struck me as someone who's looking for an excuse to clear Grant. We need to be prepared for him to twist this somehow. He won't be able to twist it, Tyrone interjected, gesturing to Nicole's phone with the videos. Not with all this evidence. Evidence can be questioned, Hughes said gently. Video angles can be misinterpreted. Officer Grant will claim she felt threatened, that she was following her training, that Nicole's behavior warranted the response. We need to be ready for every possible defense they might mount. Nicole leaned back in her chair, wincing as the movement pulled at her bruised ribs. Then we go on the offensive, she said decisively. We don't wait for them to control the narrative. Tomorrow, after my statement to Internal Affairs, we hold a press conference. I speak directly to the public, and I frame this exactly for what it is: an assault by a police officer who abused her authority. The room fell silent as everyone considered her words. Finally, Hughes nodded slowly. It's risky, he said. You'll be opening yourself up to intense scrutiny. Every aspect of your life will be examined. Let them examine, Nicole replied, her voice hard. I have nothing to hide. I've spent my entire career fighting for justice, and now I'm going to fight for it for myself. Nicole reached over, squeezing her sister's hand. We're with you, she said firmly. Whatever you need, however you want to play this, we're all in. Nicole looked around the room at these people who had dropped everything to support her. Tyrone, who had been her mentor when she first became a judge, teaching her how to navigate the complex politics of the courthouse. Nicole, who had fought beside her in countless battles for equality and justice. Hughes, who had dedicated his life to ensuring that people like them had a voice in the legal system. She felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Thank you, she said softly. All of you. But I need to be clear about something. This isn't just about what happened to me. This is about every person who has ever been brutalized by someone in authority. Every black person who has been profiled, harassed, assaulted while the system looked the other way. If I don't stand up now, if I don't fight this with everything I have, then what's the point of all the years I spent trying to make the system better? Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. They talked for another hour, planning their strategy, discussing potential obstacles, preparing for every scenario they could imagine. By the time Hughes and Tyrone left, it was nearly midnight, and Nicole was exhausted both physically and emotionally. Nicole stayed helping her sister get settled in bed, bringing her pain medication and water and sitting beside her in the darkness. You don't have to be strong all the time, Nicole said quietly. You don't have to pretend this doesn't hurt, doesn't scare you. Nicole was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. When she was hitting me, she said, all I could think was don't fight back, don't give her a reason. Because I knew if I defended myself, if I raised my hands to protect myself, she would claim I attacked her. She would use it as justification for everything. So I just let her hurt me. I let her break my face and bruise my ribs, and I didn't fight back because I knew that was the only way to survive. Tears ran down her cheeks now, though she made no sound. The only way to survive was to let her beat me. What kind of justice is that? Nicole had no answer because there wasn't one. She simply held her sister's hand in the darkness and let her cry, releasing the pain and fear and rage that she had been holding inside since the moment Officer Latoya Grant first put her hands on her. Outside the house, the night was quiet and peaceful. But inside, Nicole Harper was beginning to understand just how hard the fight ahead would be. Because it wasn't enough to prove she had been assaulted. She had to prove that the system itself was broken. And that was a battle that would require every ounce of strength, courage, and determination she possessed. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Dawn broke over Davidson County with an overcast sky that seemed to mirror the somber mood settling over the courthouse. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like strange mechanical flowers. Reporters practiced their stand-ups, camera operators tested their equipment, and producers shouted instructions into headsets. The assault of Judge Nicole Harper had become national news overnight, transforming a local incident into a flashpoint in the ongoing conversation about police brutality and racial injustice. Inside her chambers, Nicole Harper sat behind her mahogany desk reviewing her notes for the statement she would give to Internal Affairs. Despite the pain medication she had taken the night before, her face throbbed with each heartbeat, and every movement of her jaw sent sharp jolts of pain through her skull. She had looked at herself in the mirror that morning and had been shocked anew by the damage. Her left eye was swollen, nearly shut, ringed with purple bruises that extended down her cheek. Her jaw was discolored and tender, her split lip crusted and painful. She looked like a victim of domestic violence, which in a way she supposed she was a victim of violence inflicted by someone who was supposed to protect her. Bernard Hughes arrived at 8:30 sharp, carrying a briefcase and wearing one of his signature three-piece suits. Despite his 70 years, he moved with purpose, his back straight, his gaze alert. He took one look at Nicole and his expression softened with concern. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, setting his briefcase on the conference table. "Like, I was beaten by a police officer," Nicole replied dryly, "which I suppose is accurate." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "We should go over my statement one more time before Foster arrives." They spent the next 20 minutes reviewing every detail, ensuring that Nicole's account was clear, consistent, and impossible to misinterpret. Hughes had prepared a written statement, as well documenting the assault and explicitly framing it as a civil rights violation. At precisely 9 o'clock, there was a knock on the chamber door, and Rachel Stevens, the court clerk, entered, looking worried. "Judge Harper, Detective Foster, and Captain Mason are here," she announced. "I've put them in conference room B as you requested." "Thank you, Rachel," Nicole said, rising carefully from her chair. "Please hold all calls until further notice." Conference. Room B was one of the larger rooms in the courthouse typically used for settlement conferences and mediations. A long table dominated the center, flanked by leather chairs. Windows along one wall looked out over the city, though today the blinds were drawn for privacy. Detective Foster and Captain Mason stood as Nicole entered, followed by Hughes. Foster's expression was professionally neutral, but Mason looked stricken, his eyes taking in the full extent of Nicole's injuries in the bright fluorescent lighting. "Judge Harper." Foster began gesturing to the chairs. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us this morning. I know this must be difficult." They all took their seats, Hughes positioning himself directly beside Nicole, a physical barrier between her and the investigators. Foster set up a digital recorder, placing it in the center of the table, and recited the standard interview preliminaries: date, time, location, participants present. "Judge Harper, let's start from the beginning," Foster said, pulling out his notepad. "What were you doing at the courthouse on the day of the incident?" Nicole took a breath, centering herself. "I had morning sessions in Division 4, she began, her voice steady. "Criminal cases, mostly. I took a recess at noon to review some case files and make some calls. I stepped outside for privacy and fresh air. I was standing on the courthouse steps speaking with Judge Tyrone Mitchell about an upcoming case when Officer Grant approached me." "And what was the nature of Officer Grant's initial contact?" Foster asked. "She told me I was loitering and needed to move along," Nicole replied. "I indicated I needed a moment to finish my call, which was clearly important legal business. She became immediately hostile, insisting I comply with her order." Hughes interjected, placing a hand on Nicole's arm. "For the record, Officer Grant had no probable cause to detain my client. Judge Harper was engaged in protected activity on public property. The initial contact was not only unnecessary but potentially discriminatory." Foster made a note, but his expression remained skeptical. "Let's continue, Judge Harper. What happened after Officer Grant told you to move along?" Nicole recounted the escalation with precise detail, describing Grant's increasingly aggressive demeanor, her refusal to explain what law was being violated, and her sudden physical assault. She described each blow, each moment of pain, the feeling of being helpless while a uniformed officer brutalized her in front of dozens of witnesses. I asked her repeatedly what I had done wrong. Nicole said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I offered to show her identification. I tried to de-escalate the situation. Instead of responding professionally, she grabbed my arm, twisted it behind my back, and slammed me against the stone railing. When I told her she was hurting me, she hit me, multiple times, in the face and the ribs. She knocked me to the ground and continued the assault even as other officers arrived. Foster scribbled notes, his pen moving quickly across the page. Did you physically resist at any point? I protected my face with my hands, Nicole replied. Is that what you consider resistance? When someone is being beaten, should they simply lie there and accept it? Hughes leaned forward, his voice sharp. Detective, my client has the right to protect herself from an unlawful assault. She did not strike Officer Grant. She did not attempt to take Grant's weapon. She did not run or struggle. She simply tried to prevent further injury while calling for help. The video evidence supports this completely. Foster held up a hand. I'm not suggesting otherwise, counselor. I'm simply trying to establish a complete timeline of events. He turned back to Nicole. Judge Harper, did Officer Grant say anything during the assault? Any explanation for her actions? Nicole's jaw tightened, causing a flash of pain. She said, and I quote, "You people need to learn respect." When I was on the ground bleeding, she stood over me and said, "Next time, maybe you'll move when a police officer tells you to." The room fell silent. Even Foster seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Captain Mason, who had been sitting quietly throughout the interview, looked physically ill, his face pale, his hands clenched on the table. You people, Foster repeated finally. She specifically used that phrase? Yes, Nicole confirmed. There were multiple witnesses who heard it. I'm sure some of the video recordings captured it as well. Foster made another note, this one underlined several times. Judge Harper, I need to ask you something directly. Is it possible that Officer Grant didn't recognize you? That she genuinely believed you were simply a civilian who was refusing to comply? Nicole's eyes flashed with barely controlled anger. Detective, are you asking me if this assault would be acceptable if I weren't a judge? Because I can assure you it wouldn't be. What Officer Grant did was wrong regardless of my position. She assaulted a woman who had committed no crime, who posed no threat, who was simply standing on public property. The fact that I happen to be a judge makes this incident more visible, but it doesn't make it more wrong. It was always wrong. Hughes nodded approvingly, but Foster pressed on. I'm not suggesting otherwise, Judge. But Grant's defense attorney is likely to argue that this was a case of mistaken identity combined with poor judgment under stress. They'll say she didn't know who you were and that she reacted to what she perceived as defiance. Then they'll be lying, Nicole said flatly. Officer Grant has worked courthouse security for 3 years. I've presided over cases where she provided testimony. I've passed her in the halls, spoken to her at official functions. She knew exactly who I was. She just didn't care. Because at that moment, I wasn't wearing my robes. I wasn't sitting on the bench. I was a black woman who questioned her authority, and she decided to put me in my place. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and pain. Foster closed his notepad and sat back in his chair, studying Nicole with an expression that was difficult to read. Judge Harper, he said finally, I want to be clear about something. What happened to you was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. No one deserves to be treated the way you were. My job is to conduct a thorough investigation, and I take that responsibility seriously. But I need you to understand that Officer Grant will mount a vigorous defense. She'll have a union attorney who will try to poke holes in every aspect of this case. So I need to ask these hard questions now so we're prepared for what's coming. Nicole held his gaze. I understand, Detective, and I appreciate your thoroughness. But I also need you to understand something. I've been a prosecutor and a judge for over 20 years. I know how the system works. I know how cases get buried, how narratives get twisted, how officers protect each other. I'm telling you right now that I will not let that happen here. I will fight this with every resource at my disposal, and I will not stop until Officer Grant is held accountable. Foster nodded slowly. Fair enough, Your Honor. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your statement? Nicole glanced at Hughes, who gave a slight nod. Yes, she said. I want it on record that I believe this assault was racially motivated. Officer Grant saw a black woman standing on courthouse steps and decided I didn't belong there. She didn't question any of the white lawyers or staff who were also outside. She targeted me specifically, and her use of the phrase "you people" makes her motivation clear. This wasn't just an assault. It was a hate crime. Foster's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made the note. Understood. We'll include that in the report. He reached forward and clicked off the recorder. Thank you for your time, Judge Harper. We'll be in touch as the investigation proceeds. After they left, Hughes turned to Nicole with an expression of grim satisfaction. You did well, he said. You were clear, direct, and unshakable. Foster knows he can't sweep this under the rug. Nicole rubbed her temples carefully, avoiding the bruised areas. That was the easy part, she said. Now comes the hard part, facing the public. An hour later, Nicole stood before a bank of microphones in the courthouse's main press room. The space was packed with reporters, cameras, and concerned citizens who had come to hear directly from the judge who had been brutally assaulted. Nicole stood to her left, Bernard Hughes to her right, both of them forming a protective barrier. The room fell silent as Nicole stepped forward, her battered face visible to everyone under the harsh lights of the television cameras. She had prepared remarks, but as she looked out at the sea of faces, she decided to speak from the heart. My name is Judge Nicole Harper. She began, her voice carrying clearly through the room despite the swelling that distorted her speech slightly. 2 days ago on the steps of this courthouse, I was assaulted by Officer Latoya Grant. I was beaten in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses for the crime of standing on public property, while black. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Nicole continued. I want to be very clear about what happened. I was not resisting arrest because I was not under arrest. I was not being aggressive or threatening. I was standing peacefully making a phone call related to my official duties when Officer Grant approached me and ordered me to move. When I asked why she became hostile. When I questioned her authority, she became violent. She paused, letting her words sink in. I'm a judge. I've dedicated my life to the law, to justice, to ensuring that everyone, regardless of race or status, is treated fairly under our legal system. But on those steps, I wasn't treated as a judge. I wasn't even treated as a human being. I was treated as a threat, as someone who needed to be controlled and dominated because I dared to question why I was being told to leave a public space. The cameras flashed, capturing every word, every expression, every moment of raw emotion that Nicole allowed to show through her professional demeanor. Some of you might think that what happened to me is shocking because I'm a judge, she continued. You might think this is a tragedy because it happened to someone with power and status. But I'm here to tell you that what happened to me happens every single day to people who don't have my position. Black men and women are routinely harassed, brutalized, and traumatized by law enforcement officers who see them as threats rather than citizens. The only difference is that when it happens to them, no one is holding press conferences. No one is demanding investigations. No one cares. Her voice grew stronger, now filled with passion and purpose. I'm standing here today not just for myself, but for every person who has been victimized by those who are supposed to protect them. I'm standing here to say that this ends now. We will not accept excuses. We will not accept justifications. We will not accept a system that allows officers like Latoya Grant to brutalize citizens without consequence. What are you calling for? Judge Harper, a reporter shouted from the back. Nicole looked directly at the camera. I'm calling for Officer Grant to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I'm calling for a comprehensive review of courthouse security and the officers who staff it. I'm calling for mandatory training on implicit bias and de-escalation. And I'm calling for transparency in police misconduct cases. The public has a right to know when officers abuse their authority and what consequences they face. Another reporter jumped in. Do you believe this was a hate crime? Nicole nodded firmly. Yes, I do. Officer Grant specifically used racially charged language during the assault. She told me, "You people need to learn respect." She targeted me because of my race, and she used her badge as a weapon to enforce her prejudice. That is the definition of a hate crime. What about Officer Grant's career? A third reporter asked. Should she ever be allowed to serve in law enforcement again? Nicole's expression hardened. Someone who beats an unarmed citizen for asking questions should not carry a badge. Someone who uses racially motivated violence to assert dominance should not have the power to arrest or detain anyone. Officer Grant has demonstrated that she is unfit to serve in any law enforcement capacity, and I will advocate for her permanent removal from the force. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, with Nicole answering each one with careful precision. She refused to be drawn into speculation about the criminal charges Grant might face, focusing instead on the broader systemic issues. When the press conference finally concluded, she stepped away from the microphones, exhausted but resolute. Nicole wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders as they left through a side door, avoiding the crush of reporters. You were incredible, she whispered. You just changed the entire narrative. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was swift and divided. On social media, hashtags began trending "Justice for Judge Harper" and "Hold them accountable." Supporters praised Nicole's courage and called for immediate action against Officer Grant. But there was also backlash. Police unions issued statements defending Grant, claiming the full story hadn't been told. Conservative commentators questioned whether Nicole had been respectful enough to the officer, suggesting that civilians had a duty to comply immediately with any police order, regardless of whether it was lawful. By evening, the incident had become a polarizing national story, with cable news shows dedicating entire segments to debating what had happened. Some hosts showed the video footage frame by frame, pointing out that Nicole had done nothing to provoke the assault. Others invited police representatives who claimed that the videos didn't show everything, that Grant must have had a reason for her actions, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. Nicole watched some of the coverage from her home, her sister beside, her and Tyrone checking in via phone. She felt a complex mixture of emotions: anger at the attempts to justify the assault, satisfaction that the story was getting attention, but also deep weariness at having to relive the trauma over and over again. "They're already trying to tear you down," Tyrone said over the speakerphone. "They're digging into your past cases, looking for anything they can use against you." "Let them dig," Nicole replied. "My record speaks for itself. I've been fair, impartial, and dedicated to justice. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find." But even as she said it, she knew the battle ahead would be brutal, because it wasn't really about her record or her character. It was about a system that reflexively protected its own, even when the evidence of wrongdoing was overwhelming. It was about people's desperate need to believe that if you just comply, if you just do what you're told, you'll be safe. Acknowledging what had happened to her meant acknowledging that no one was truly safe, that the rules didn't always protect you, that sometimes the system itself was the threat. As the news coverage continued into the night, Nicole made a decision. Tomorrow I would return to the bench. She would walk into her courtroom battered but unbowed, and she would do her job, because that was the most powerful statement she could make, that she refused to be intimidated, that justice would continue no matter who tried to stop it. The fight had only just begun, and Nicole Harper was ready for war. In a sterile conference room 30 miles outside Davidson County, Officer Latoya Grant sat across from her union-appointed attorney, Dennis Crawford. Crawford was a bulldog of a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a reputation for getting officers acquitted even in the most damning circumstances. He had represented dozens of cops accused of excessive force and knew every trick, every loophole, every way to manipulate public perception and legal proceedings. Grant looked different than she had on the courthouse steps. Gone was the crisp uniform and the confident swagger. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain sweater, and her hair hung loose around her face, making her look younger and more vulnerable. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them on the table. "Latoya," Crawford said, his voice firm but not unkind, "we need to go over your statement one more time. The DA is pushing hard for charges, and with the video evidence we're facing an uphill battle. I need you to be completely honest with me about what happened that day." Grant swallowed hard. "I told you already," she said, her voice hoarse. "I saw someone loitering outside the courthouse. I approached her to ask her to move along. She got aggressive with me and I had to restrain her." Crawford leaned back in his chair, studying her. "The video shows you striking her multiple times. It shows her on the ground bleeding. How do you explain that?" "She was resisting," Grant insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "She pulled away from me when I tried to escort her from the area. I felt threatened, so I used necessary force to subdue her." Crawford pulled out his tablet and turned it to face Grant. The screen showed a freeze frame from one of the witness videos, the moment when Grant's fist connected with Nicole Harper's jaw. "Latoya," he said quietly, "this doesn't look like someone subduing a resisting suspect. This looks like someone hitting a person who is trying to protect themselves." Grant looked away, her jaw clenching. "You don't understand what it's like out there," she said. "Every day I deal with people who think they can do whatever they want. People who refuse to listen, who question everything, who make my job impossible. I'm supposed to maintain order, and when someone challenges that, I have to respond." "By beating them?" Crawford asked, his tone sharp. "Latoya, I've defended a lot of cops over the years, and I can usually find an angle some way to frame their actions as reasonable under the circumstances. But this case is different. Your victim is a sitting judge. She's a decorated Navy veteran. She has an impeccable record and absolutely no history of criminal behavior. And the video shows clearly that she wasn't aggressive or threatening. She was black," Grant blurted out, then immediately looked horrified at her own words. I mean, she fit a profile. There had been reports of suspicious activity in the area, and she matched the description." Crawford's eyes narrowed. What description? What suspicious activity? Grant fumbled, clearly making it up as she went. Someone hanging around the courthouse. Someone who might be casing it for criminal purposes. She was standing there for a long time on her phone. She's a judge, Crawford said, his voice hard. She works there. And you knew that, didn't you? You'd seen her before. Grant's defense crumbled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe. Everything happened so fast. I was having a bad day, and when she didn't immediately comply, I snapped. Crawford rubbed his face, tiredly. Okay, he said finally. Here's where we are. The DA is going to charge you probably with assault, battery, and civil rights violations. The videos are going to play on every news channel in the country. Judge Harper is sympathetic, articulate, and the physical evidence of her injuries is damning. Our only hope is to humanize you to make the jury understand that you're not a monster, just a person who made a terrible mistake under stress. Grant looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. So you can get me off? I didn't say that, Crawford replied bluntly. I said that's our only hope. But I need to be honest with you, LaToya. Your chances aren't good. The best outcome we can realistically hope for is a plea deal that keeps you out of prison and ends your career in law enforcement. No, Grant said sharply. I'm not pleading guilty. I did my job, and if she had just listened to me, none of this would have happened. This is on her, not me. Crawford stared at her for a long moment. If that's your position, he said carefully, then we're going to trial, and I need to warn you, that could end very badly. Judge Harper is going to testify. The jury is going to see her battered face. They're going to hear her describe how you beat her while she begged you to stop. And unless you can give me anything that justifies your actions, you're going to be convicted. Grant's hands clenched into fists on the table. Then make something up, she hissed. That's your job, isn't it? To create reasonable doubt? Crawford's expression hardened. My job is to defend you vigorously within the bounds of the law. I won't suborn perjury and I won't manufacture evidence. If you want that kind of lawyer, you'll need to look elsewhere. They sat in tense silence for several minutes. Finally, Grant spoke, her voice small and defeated. What do you need me to do? Crawford pulled out a legal pad. First, we establish your state of mind that day. You'd received a written warning from your supervisor that morning, correct? Grant nodded. Captain Mason said I was too aggressive with civilians, that I needed to work on my de-escalation skills. Good, Crawford said, making notes. That establishes that you were under stress, feeling scrutinized by your superiors. That doesn't excuse what you did, but it provides context. Second, we need character witnesses, fellow officers who can testify that you're normally professional, that this was out of character for you. Grant bit her lip. Most of the guys have been avoiding me since this happened. They don't want to be associated with me. Keep trying, Crawford instructed. Crawford, we need anyone willing to say you're not normally violent. Third, we need to address the racial element. Judge Harper is claiming this was racially motivated, that you targeted her because she's black. We need to counter that narrative. How? Grant asked. I said what I said. The videos caught it. We argue that you use that phrase with everyone, Crawford said, regardless of race. That it's become a habit, a figure of speech. We bring in experts to testify about how police officers develop verbal patterns under stress. It's thin, but it's something. Grant looked skeptical. Will that work? Probably not, Crawford admitted. But we have to try everything. Now, about the assault itself, we need to establish that you felt genuinely threatened. Can you describe any movements Judge Harper made that you interpreted as aggressive? Grant closed her eyes, trying to remember. When I grabbed her arm, she pulled away, hard, like she was trying to get free. That's self-preservation, not aggression, Crawford said. Try again. Grant's frustration boiled over. I don't know, okay? I was angry. She questioned me, made me feel small, like I wasn't good enough to tell her what to do. And I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Is that what you want to hear? Crawford set down his pen and looked at her with something approaching pity. "Latoya," he said gently, "you need to understand something. What you're describing is assault, pure and simple. You attacked someone because they bruised your ego. That's not police work, that's a crime." "So I'm going to prison," Grant said flatly. "Maybe," Crawford replied. "Unless you're willing to accept responsibility, show genuine remorse, and work with the prosecution on a plea deal. If you do that, I can probably negotiate something minimal: jail time, probation, counseling. But if you insist on claiming you did nothing wrong, if you maintain that this was justified, then yes, you're probably going to prison." Grant's world seemed to collapse around her. Everything she had worked for, her career, her reputation, her identity as a law enforcement officer, all of it was crumbling. And the worst part, the part she could barely admit even to herself, was that she knew Crawford was right. She had crossed a line. She had let her anger, her prejudice, her need for control transform her from a peace officer into an aggressor. "I need time to think," Grant said finally. "Can we reconvene tomorrow?" Crawford nodded, gathering his papers. "Take the time you need, but decide quickly. The longer we wait, the more the public narrative solidifies against you. And, Latoya, one more thing. If you decide to fight this at trial, you need to be prepared for what that means. Judge Harper isn't going to go easy on you. She's going to use this case to expose every flaw in the system, every instance of police misconduct that's been swept under the rug. You won't just be defending yourself. You'll be the face of everything wrong with law enforcement." After Crawford left, Grant sat alone in the conference room staring at the wall. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, most of them hostile. Social media had turned her into a villain, her face plastered across every news site, accompanied by the damning footage of the assault. Death threats filled her inbox, along with messages calling her a disgrace to the badge, a racist, a monster. Part of her wanted to believe she had done nothing wrong, that she was being unfairly persecuted for simply doing her job. But another part, the part she had been desperately trying to silence, knew the truth. She had seen a black woman standing confidently on courthouse steps, and something in her had snapped. Years of resentment, of feeling passed over for promotions, of working in a system that she felt didn't appreciate her, had found an outlet in that moment, and she had taken it out on someone who had done absolutely nothing to deserve it. Her phone rang and she saw it was her mother. Grant hesitated, then answered. "Mama," she said, her voice breaking. "Latoya," her mother's voice came through, tight with emotion. "I just saw the news. Tell me they're lying. Tell me, you didn't do what they're saying you did." Grant couldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with disappointment and shame. "Oh, baby," her mother said, and Grant could hear tears in her voice. "What have you done? What were you thinking?" "I don't know," Grant whispered. "I don't know, Mama. I messed up. I messed up so bad." They talked for nearly an hour, Grant finally confessing what had really happened. Her mother listened, alternating between sympathy for her daughter and horror at her actions. When Grant finally hung up, she felt more alone than she ever had in her life. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Kevin Morrison, the officer who had witnessed the assault, sat in his own home wrestling with his conscience. Morrison had been a cop for 15 years, and in that time he had seen his share of questionable behavior. Excessive force, planted evidence, testimony that didn't quite match reality. He had always looked the other way, telling himself it wasn't his place to question his fellow officers, that the job was hard enough without cops turning on each other. But what he had seen on those courthouse steps had shaken him. There had been no ambiguity, no gray area. Grant had brutalized an innocent woman, and he had been too slow to stop it. Now Internal Affairs wanted his statement, and he knew that what he said would likely determine Grant's fate. His wife, Elena, found him sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. "Kevin," she said softly, sitting beside him, "you need to tell them the truth. You know that, right?" Morrison nodded. "I know," he said. "But if I testify against her, the other officers, they'll never forgive me. I'll be labeled a rat. My career will be over." "Your career," Elena said firmly, "shouldn't be built on protecting officers who assault innocent people. That woman is a judge, Kevin. She dedicates her life to justice, and one of your colleagues beat her bloody for standing on courthouse steps. How can you stay silent about that? Morrison knew she was right. He had known it from the moment he pulled Grant away from Judge Harper. But knowing what was right and having the courage to do it were two different things. The next morning, Morrison walked into Internal Affairs headquarters and gave a full, detailed statement. He described how he had seen Grant approach Judge Harper, how the situation had escalated without any provocation, how Grant had attacked viciously and without justification. He confirmed the racial slurs and the excessive force. And when Detective Foster asked if he believed Grant's actions were justified, Morrison looked him in the eye and said, "Absolutely not. What I witnessed was a criminal assault by a police officer against an innocent citizen." His statement would become a cornerstone of the case against Grant. Combined with the video evidence and Judge Harper's testimony, it would paint an undeniable picture of what had really happened that day. And though Morrison would indeed face backlash from some of his fellow officers, he would also gain respect from others who were tired of the code of silence that protected bad cops at the expense of good policing. Back in the conference room, Dennis Crawford prepared for the uphill battle ahead. He knew that defending LaToya Grant would be one of the most difficult cases of his career. The evidence was overwhelming, the victim was sympathetic, and the optics were terrible. But he was a professional, and he would mount the best defense possible even if he personally believed his client was guilty. He began assembling a team of experts, forensic psychologists who could testify about stress responses, use of force, trainers who might be able to find some justification for Grant's actions, character witnesses who could humanize her. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and probably futile, but it was his job. As news of Officer Morrison's cooperation leaked, the public reaction was swift. Many praised him as a hero, an officer willing to break the blue wall of silence to ensure justice was served. Others within law enforcement condemned him as a traitor. The Fraternal Order of Police issued a statement supporting Grant and condemning what they called a rush to judgment. But public opinion was largely against them. The videos had been seen by millions, and no amount of spin could change what people had witnessed with their own eyes. Officer LaToya Grant sat in her apartment watching the news coverage, feeling the walls close in around her. She had made a decision. She would fight the charges. She would maintain that she had acted appropriately, that Judge Harper had brought this on herself by refusing to comply. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her career, but it was all she had left. What Grant didn't understand was that by refusing to take responsibility, by choosing to fight rather than admit wrongdoing, she was ensuring that this case would become much bigger than just her. It would become a referendum on police accountability, on racial bias in law enforcement, on the systems that protected officers who abused their power. And Judge Nicole Harper was more than ready for that fight. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Division 4 as Judge Nicole Harper prepared to return to the bench. It had been exactly 1 week since the assault, and though her physical injuries had begun to heal, the bruises fading from deep purple to yellowish green, the emotional weight of what had happened still pressed heavily upon her. She stood before the mirror in her chambers, carefully adjusting her judicial robes. The heavy black fabric settled around her shoulders like armor. A soft knock came at the door before it opened a crack. Rachel Stevens, her court clerk, stepped inside. "Judge Harper," she said gently. "The courtroom is ready. We have a full docket today, and there's significant media presence outside." Nicole nodded slowly, her eyes lingering on her reflection. The swelling around her left eye had subsided enough that she could see clearly, though the discoloration still lingered. Her jaw still ached when she spoke, but she could manage. More importantly, she needed to manage. Stepping away from the bench would send the wrong message that she could be intimidated, that violence could drive her from her duty, and that was something she refused to allow. "How many reporters, Rachel?" she asked, turning from the mirror. "At least 20, Rachel said. "The courthouse had to add extra security. Everyone wants to see you return." She hesitated, then added softly, "Judge, If you need more time, no one would blame you. Nicole smiled faintly, the motion tugging painfully at her healing lip. I appreciate that, Rachel, but I need to do this. For myself and for everyone watching to see if justice can survive when it's tested. She gathered her files for the day: preliminary hearings, arraignments, motions, normal work, the rhythm of the law. But today nothing would be normal. Every ruling she made, every tone in her voice, would be dissected by cameras and analysts. She would have to be flawless. Out in the hallway, Judge Tyrone Mitchell waited for her. He looked her over with concern that bordered on brotherly. Nicole, he said quietly, are you absolutely certain about this? The chief judge offered to reassign your docket another week. I'm certain, she replied firmly. If I don't do this now, if I let fear or pain keep me from my duties, then Grant wins. Every officer who thinks they can abuse their authority wins. I won't give them that satisfaction. Tyrone nodded, though worry remained in his eyes. Then know that you have support. Every judge in this building stands behind you. We've already filed a joint complaint with the State Bar against any attempt to question your impartiality. Thank you, Tyrone, Nicole said, touching his arm briefly. That means more than you know. Together they walked toward the courtroom. Even through the private corridor reserved for judges, Nicole could hear the distant hum of voices: the reporters, the cameras, the spectators. The entire courthouse seemed to pulse with expectation. Inside, Division 4 buzzed like a live wire. The gallery was packed: law students, activists, local officials, and curious citizens. Several off-duty judges sat in the back row. Security was tight. Uniformed deputies stood at every door. None were from courthouse security. Captain Mason had reassigned all of them pending investigation. When Nicole entered, the room fell silent. She could feel eyes following her every step. The lawyers at the tables rose instinctively, some looking supportive, others wary, all aware that they were witnessing something historic. Rachel raised her voice. All rise. Division 4, Criminal Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge. Nicole Harper presiding. The scrape of chairs echoed as everyone stood. Nicole climbed the short flight of steps and took her seat behind the bench. From up there, she saw everything: the defendants in orange jumpsuits, the anxious lawyers, the court reporter, the cameras glinting in the back. She drew a breath, steady and deliberate. Please be seated, she said. The room settled. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your patience and understanding as we return to our regular schedule. We have a busy docket today, so let's proceed efficiently. Her first case appeared. On the docket, State of Tennessee versus Jonathan Baker, a preliminary hearing on robbery and assault charges. Is the defendant present? Nicole asked. A public defender rose. Yes, Your Honor. Jonathan Baker is present and represented by the public defender's office. The young man beside him looked barely out of his teens, nervous, hands fidgeting. Nicole studied him for a long moment. She saw not just a defendant, but someone trapped in the machinery of the system she dedicated her life to fixing. Mr. Baker, she said, her tone gentle but firm. You're charged with robbery and assault. These are serious allegations. Do you understand the nature of the charges against you? Yes, ma'am, he murmured. The hearing unfolded with routine precision. The arresting officer's testimony was halting, inconsistent. Nicole's questions came sharp and clear, dissecting details, exposing contradictions. The defense attorney looked relieved. The prosecutor looked uneasy. After a moment's thought, she rendered her decision. Based on the testimony and evidence presented, I find sufficient probable cause to bind this case over for trial. Mr. Baker, you'll be arraigned next week. Bail is set at $15,000 with standard conditions. Next case. Her gavel struck once decisive, final. The morning continued in the same rhythm: hearings, motions, rulings. To anyone watching, it was business as usual. But inside, every breath felt like a test. Every ruling was proof that she could still command a courtroom, that her authority had not been broken on those courthouse steps. By the time she recessed for lunch, whispers in the gallery had shifted. The conversation wasn't about her assault anymore. It was about her focus, her composure, her resilience. Back in her chambers, Nicole sank into her chair. Her ribs ached, her jaw throbbed, but she felt stronger than she had in days. On her desk sat a stack of envelopes, messages from colleagues, statements of solidarity from bar associations, even handwritten notes from strangers thanking her for her courage. But 3 envelopes stood out. Formal motions for her recusal filed by defense. Attorneys, she sighed and opened them. Each claimed that because she had been assaulted by a police officer, she could no longer fairly preside over cases involving law enforcement testimony. She had expected this. It was inevitable. Her phone buzzed. It was Bernard Hughes. "Nicole," he said without preamble, "I've seen the recusal motions, they're garbage and we both know it, but we'll need to address them on record." "I know," she said, scanning the documents. "I've already drafted my response. These motions aren't about fairness, they're tactics. They're trying to rattle me to undermine the court, but I won't let that happen." "That's exactly what I wanted to hear," Hughes said approvingly. "Still, we'll need to be strategic. I'm hearing rumors that the police union's planning to push for your temporary removal, claiming bias against law enforcement." "Let them try," Nicole replied, her tone steel. "My record speaks for itself. I've ruled for and against officers depending on the evidence. They can dig through 20 years of transcripts and still won't find a hint of prejudice. If they think they can use what happened to me as a weapon, they'll learn quickly how wrong they are." "That's my judge," Hughes said with a faint chuckle. Then his voice lowered. "By the way, Grant's arraignment is scheduled for next week. Word is she's pleading not guilty." Nicole's expression didn't change, but a chill ran through her. "Of course she is," she said quietly. "She's going to claim she was doing her job." "Exactly," Hughes said. "They're going to push a mistaken perception. Defense say she didn't recognize you, that she felt threatened, that her use of force was justified." "She knew exactly who I was," Nicole replied. "We've spoken in that courthouse before. She wasn't afraid, she was angry." Hughes sighed. "I believe you, and so will a jury. But this won't be easy. They'll play on fear, on sympathy, for police under pressure. You'll be cross-examined, dissected, second-guessed." "I've been cross-examined my entire career," Nicole said firmly. "I can handle it." When the call ended, she leaned back and stared at the sunlight creeping across her desk. The fatigue hit her in waves, part physical, part emotional, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. At 1 o'clock sharp, she returned to the courtroom. The afternoon docket moved briskly. Cases came and went: drug possession, burglary, domestic disputes. The work grounded her. Each ruling reaffirmed who she was: a judge, not a victim. But as the final case concluded, Rachel approached with an envelope. "Judge," she said softly, "this was just delivered from the chief of police's office." Nicole opened it. Inside was a single-page letter printed on official letterhead. The message was brief and calculated. "The department recognizes the hardship you have endured and the courage you've shown in resuming your duties. However, out of concern for potential conflicts of interest, we respectfully request that you refrain from presiding over any cases involving law enforcement. Officers pending the outcome of the investigation into Officer Grant." Nicole read it twice, then folded it carefully. "File it," she said quietly. Rachel hesitated. "Do you want to respond?" "Oh, I will," Nicole said. "Just not in writing." That evening, she made a rare appearance on the courthouse steps. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out, cameras flashing. She stood tall, her robe catching the last rays of sunset. "Judge Harper," one called out, "how do you respond to the chief's letter requesting you recuse yourself from cases involving police?" Nicole's gaze swept the crowd. "I respond by showing up," she said clearly. "I am sworn to uphold the law impartially. That hasn't changed, and it won't. My duty isn't to protect egos, it's to protect justice." "Do you think the system can be fair to you after what happened?" another shouted. "The system," she said, "is only as fair as the people within it." "I intend to make sure it stays that way," the crowd murmured. Flashes went off. One reporter asked, Are you sending a message to Officer Grant? Nicole's tone didn't waver. The only message I'm sending, she said, is that no one is above the law. With that, she turned and re-entered the courthouse. The crowd erupted behind her, but she didn't look back. Later that night, after the building had emptied and silence filled Division 4 once more, Nicole lingered in her courtroom. She ran her hand along the polished wood of the bench, feeling the cool, smooth surface under her palm. For years, this had been her sanctuary, a place where truth mattered, where words could heal or convict. And though that sanctity had been violated, she was reclaiming it piece by piece. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Tyrone. Proud of you today. The entire judiciary's watching and standing with you. She smiled faintly. Thank you, she whispered into the empty room. Outside, the courthouse lights burned against the night sky like sentinels guarding the place where justice was being reborn through one woman's defiance. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, hearings, scrutiny, political pressure, but for now, Judge Nicole Harper had done the impossible. She had faced the system that once betrayed her, and she had refused to bow. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the bruises and the headlines, she felt the smallest ember of peace ignite again, because the bench, the symbol of her authority, her calling, her faith was still hers, and she wasn't leaving it for anyone. The courthouse was different now. What had once been a place of quiet order had become a crucible of tension and expectation. News crews camped permanently outside, their vans lined like battle tanks along the street. Protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Judge Harper," while counter-demonstrators shouted about supporting law enforcement. Inside, metal detectors hummed non-stop, every officer's step echoing in the marble halls like a warning. It had been 6 months since the assault. 6 months of hearings, motions, leaked footage, and a nationwide conversation about race and power in the justice system. Now at last it was time for State of Tennessee versus Officer Latoya Grant. Judge Eleanor Mathers, a seasoned jurist with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, presided over the trial to avoid any appearance of conflict. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, one judge presiding over the case of another judge's beating. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Reporters, activists, and law students sat shoulder to shoulder, notebooks ready. Nicole Harper entered quietly through the witness corridor. She no longer bore the visible scars of that day. Her face had healed, but the shadow of it lingered. She walked with calm authority, dressed in a navy suit instead of robes, her posture straight, her chin high. The whispers followed her, the quiet awe reserved for those who have faced violence and refused to bend. At the defense table sat Officer Latoya Grant. Her uniform was gone, replaced by a black blazer that looked too stiff, too deliberate. She looked smaller somehow, her once fierce expression dulled by exhaustion. When Nicole entered, Grant's eyes darted away, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. Dennis Crawford, the defense attorney, rose first. "Your Honor," he began, "the defense moves that this case be dismissed due to prejudicial media coverage that has rendered a fair trial impossible." Judge Mathers fixed him with a glare over her reading glasses. "Motion denied. We've seated a vetted jury. Proceed, Mr. Crawford." The trial began. Prosecutor Elena Ramirez approached the jury with calm precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this case isn't about politics. It's not about social media or headlines. It's about an officer of the law who committed a violent, unprovoked assault against a citizen, a sitting judge on the courthouse steps. It's about accountability. The badge is a symbol of trust. Officer Grant turned it into a weapon." She let the silence linger, then pointed to the large screen beside her. "You will see the footage yourselves. You will hear from witnesses. You will hear from Judge Harper, and when you do, you will see what justice demands." Crawford followed, his tone practiced, almost weary. "Officer Grant has served this community for years. She has faced threats, violence, and unimaginable stress. On that day, she made a mistake, an awful one, but not a malicious one. The question before you isn't whether something bad happened. It's whether what happened was criminal, We will show that Officer Grant believed she was acting within her duty to maintain order under volatile circumstances. It was a soft opening, deliberately humanizing, but even Crawford knew the mountain he had to climb. The prosecution's first witnesses were the bystanders who had filmed the assault. One after another, they described what they'd seen. Nicole Harper calmly talking on her phone, Officer Grant shouting, the sudden violent escalation. Their phones were entered into evidence and the videos were projected onto the screen. No matter how many times the footage had aired on television, the courtroom's silence as it played was absolute. Gasps rippled when Grant's fist struck Nicole's face when Nicole crumpled to the stone steps. One juror covered her mouth. Another shook his head in disbelief. When the clip ended, the sound of Nicole's labored breathing still seemed to echo through the room. Next came Officer Kevin Morrison. His voice was steady but heavy with guilt. I saw Officer Grant grab Judge Harper without cause, he said. Judge Harper didn't resist. She was calm, trying to reason with her. Grant hit her anyway. Did you attempt to stop it? Ramirez asked. Yes, Morrison said softly. But I was too late. And when you did intervene, what did Officer Grant say? She said the judge was resisting, but she wasn't, not at all. His testimony was devastating. Even Crawford didn't cross-examine aggressively. He knew pressing too hard would only make things worse. When Nicole finally took the stand, the courtroom's energy changed. Every eye turned toward her. She was sworn in, her right hand trembling just slightly before steadying. Ramirez began gently. Judge Harper, can you describe for the jury what you were doing on the courthouse steps that day? Nicole's voice was clear, deliberate. I was taking a phone call related to a pending case. I had stepped outside for privacy. I was standing quietly when Officer Grant approached and ordered me to move. Did she explain why? No. She said I was loitering. I asked what ordinance I was violating. She refused to answer. And what happened next? Nicole inhaled slowly. She grabbed my arm. I told her she was hurting me. Then she slammed me against the railing. Her composure held, but her voice caught briefly on the next words. She hit me. Multiple times in the face and the ribs. I remember thinking that if I moved, she'd shoot me. So I just stood there and let her. Even Judge Mathers's expression softened. Did you at any point threaten her physically or verbally? No, Nicole said. The only thing I did was ask why. When Ramirez was done, Crawford rose for cross-examination. Judge Harper, he began carefully, you've had a long career in the justice system. Would you agree that law enforcement officers face extreme stress on the job? Yes, she said, but stress doesn't excuse violence. Of course, he said quickly. But if an officer perceives non-compliance, is it fair to say she may need to act swiftly to maintain control? Nicole looked directly at him. Non-compliance is not a death sentence. It's not an excuse for brutality. If we start justifying assault because someone didn't move fast enough, then we no longer live under the rule of law, we live under the rule of fear. Her answer landed like a thunderclap. Even Crawford couldn't hide the flicker of respect in his eyes. When it was her turn to testify, Officer Grant looked pale and defiant by turns. Her lawyer had coached her to appear remorseful but firm. I never meant to hurt her, she said, voice trembling. I thought she was being confrontational. I didn't recognize her as a judge. She turned away when I spoke, and I thought she was ignoring me. Things got out of hand. Did you use the phrase, "You people need to learn respect"? Ramirez asked on cross. Grant hesitated. I might have. I don't remember exactly. Ramirez pressed harder. You don't remember saying those words as you stood over a bleeding woman? Grant's eyes filled with tears. It was a mistake. I was angry, okay? I was under pressure. Everyone's been treating me like a monster, but nobody understands what it's like out there. Nicole sat stone still at the plaintiff's table, watching the woman who had beaten her try to paint herself as the victim. Ramirez's final question was quiet, almost gentle. Officer Grant, if you could go back to that day, would you do anything differently? Grant's lower lip quivered. "I'd walk away," she whispered. It was the first truthful thing she'd said all trial. Prosecutor Ramirez faced the jury. "One last time. You've seen the video. You've heard the testimony. You've witnessed the defense attempt to turn a violent assault into a misunderstanding. But justice doesn't bend to excuses. Officer Grant didn't make a split-second decision, she made a series of them. Each one escalating, each one cruel. This wasn't fear, this was rage. And if we allow rage to wear a badge, no one is safe." Crawford followed, his tone resigned but persuasive. "You are not here to punish anger, you are here to judge intent. My client is guilty of losing control, but not of a hate crime. She was a flawed officer, not a racist monster. Please don't let public outrage decide this case. Let the evidence and your conscience guide you." After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood, paper trembling in her hands. "On the charge of aggravated assault under color of authority, we find the defendant, Officer LaToya Grant, guilty." Grant's head dropped. A faint sob escaped. "Her. On the charge of civil rights violation with racial motivation, guilty." Gasps filled the room. Nicole closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Judge Mathers read the sentencing 2 weeks later. "Officer LaToya Grant, for the crimes of assault and violation of civil rights under color of authority, this court sentences you to 8 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 5. Grant wept openly. Her mother, seated in the second row, cried too, not for the sentence, but for the daughter she no longer recognized. As deputies led Grant away in handcuffs, she turned once toward Nicole. Their eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, both women seemed suspended in the enormity of what had happened, the ruin, the justice, the cost. Then Grant was gone. The verdict sent shockwaves through the nation. Civil rights leaders hailed it as a watershed moment, the rare instance when a police officer faced true accountability for excessive force. Law enforcement unions condemned it, claiming the system had bowed to political pressure. But for ordinary citizens, it felt like vindication, a fragile glimmer that maybe, just maybe, the scales could balance after all. Judge Nicole Harper returned to the bench the following week. This time, when she entered the courtroom, the gallery stood not just out of procedure but out of respect. Her bruises had faded, but her resolve had not. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps afterward, shouting questions. One asked, "Judge Harper, do you feel justice was served?" Nicole paused before answering. "Justice," she said, "isn't about vengeance, it's about truth. Today the truth was seen, heard, and acknowledged. That's all I ever wanted." Another asked, "Do you forgive Officer Grant?" Nicole's expression softened, but remained unreadable. "Forgiveness takes time," she said quietly. But accountability had to come first. Months later, in a packed university auditorium, Nicole delivered a keynote speech titled, "Blind Justice, Seeing the System for What It Is." She spoke not as a victim, but as a reformer. When people ask how a judge could be beaten on courthouse steps, she told the audience, what they're really asking is how this could happen where justice is supposed to live. The answer is simple. The system reflects the people within it. Until we confront our biases, our fears, and our silence, justice will always be conditional. Her words earned a standing ovation. That night, after the crowd dispersed, Nicole stood alone outside the courthouse. The same steps where she had bleed were now scrubbed clean, the stone smooth beneath her hand. For a long moment she just stood there, breathing in the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed a reminder that the fight for fairness was never truly over. She whispered to herself, still standing. And she was. Because despite everything, the pain, the fear, the public spectacle, Nicole Harper had turned her trauma into testimony, her wounds into weaponry for change. The courthouse steps that once symbolized betrayal now stood as proof that dignity can survive even the darkest injustice. And for the first time in a long while, justice didn't just wear robes. It had a face. A black woman's face, unbroken, unbowed, and unforgettable.